First off, my name is Chris Collier. I'm the Executive Director of Renew Theaters, and I want to thank you for joining us, especially on this beautiful summer night, to be sitting by your computer to discuss His Girl Friday with us. We are really happy to have this discussion series ongoing and to have all of you back to talk about this film. Before I dive into the rest of my notes, obviously the theaters, or at least 3 of our theaters, reopened 2 weeks ago. We were very, very excited to be able to offer His Girl Friday back on the big screen as a viewing alternative. So I was just actually curious if I could see a show of hands. How many of you had a chance to actually come see the film at the theater? Nice, nice. Okay. Well, I know our game plan going forward for the rest of the summer is we are going to be working a classic film into our mix at each of the theaters over the successive weeks. And Hannah and I have been talking and game planning to make sure that all of the films upcoming are ones that we'll be able to offer at the theater too, giving you the opportunity to see it both either at home, if that works for you, or to come to the theater. And if anyone hadn't seen the announcement, the County Theater will finally be reopening this Friday. So make sure if you're in the area to come join us and check out the incredible work on the expansion project. Thank you to everyone who participated in fundraising for that and for all of your patience. We are so excited to share the new County Theater with everyone. So that is the giveaway that yes, there are 4 theaters represented here: the Ambler Theater, County Theater, Highway Theater, and Princeton Garden Theater. And one of the great things about these events is the ability to bring all of these 4 communities together and also to welcome people outside of our immediate geographical vicinity to participate in these discussions. So thank you for joining us. I also want to give a big thank you to the Vesta Fund, which is the organization that created the Film 101 program and sponsors this series and allows us to make it free for members. So thank you to everyone who's a member. You really are the lifeblood of our theaters and keep us operating. I am going to turn things over to Hannah in 1 second, and I know that we are able to announce some of our upcoming titles. But before that, the Zoom protocols. As always, we encourage you to remain on mute unless it is time to talk. That makes everything go more seamlessly. Hopefully later in the conversation, we can open things up a little more and jump around and make it more like a conversation. But in the beginning, we'll start on mute. Hannah's going to kick things off with a short discussion about the film, and then we'll open it up to comments. Please use the raise hand feature, and I will call on you, and we'll start the conversation that way. As always, the chat will be open, and the chat often is a very lively place to talk about films, have some great asides, and I'll be monitoring that as well to bring anything that bubbles up there into the main conversation. I think that's everything. Again, really glad to have you all here for this discussion. Really excited to have had some of you back at the theaters and to have movies back on screen, and really looking forward to diving into this conversation. So it is my pleasure once again to turn things over to Hannah Jack, who is a writer for Turner Classic Movies. She has scripted many of the introductions for their hosts and has been guiding us over the past couple months through a variety of classic films. We have Hannah leading us on a month-by-month basis through classic Hollywood films. So if this is your first time joining us, I hope you enjoy it and do come back on successive months as we continue to work through really interesting titles in the classic Hollywood catalog. So Hannah, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you all, as Chris said, very much for spending this beautiful, I hope wherever you are, the weather is as beautiful as it is here, summer night here on your computer. It's very exciting to be able to offer some of these titles in the theaters, and moving forward, we've been doing kind of tie-ins to some of the programming on Turner Classic Movies wherever it continues to work to overlap, titles that are available to screen in the theaters and titles that have some sort of TCM connection for those of you who have TCM and are big fans. We're going to continue to make those integrations. Some of the upcoming titles I have chosen, and Chris has incredibly made it happen, that we're going to be able to make this tie in to stuff that I know is coming on TCM and is going to be available in the theaters. So as we've been doing, before we talk about His Girl Friday tonight, I am going to tease the upcoming titles. So for Chris, I'm doing all three, right? Yeah, okay, great. So for July, this is one of the great classics that is going to be in all the theaters, and Chris can give more, he can jump in a second with more details about at some of the theaters. It's playing at different times at different theaters. We are returning to where we began this year with Alfred Hitchcock, but we're going to see a very different era of his career with the 1954 classic Rear Window. That's going to be July's title, and that will be in the theaters. So please, I hope you'll join me on July 13th for Rear Window. And we're going to be talking later Hitchcock. And then there is a TCM tie-in that I am not at liberty to talk about, but I can also tell you that it is the 65th anniversary of the August title. I've been hoping to kind of bop around between different genres throughout the year and present kind of a big picture of lots of different types of Hollywood movies. We haven't done a musical yet, so we are going to do the 65th anniversary of the musical High Society in August, remake of the Philadelphia Story. Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Grace Kelly, Louis Armstrong, and there will be a special TCM tie-in for that for August, and that will be in the theaters too. And then for September, one of my personal favorite movies, and it's something I hope you've seen. If you haven't seen, it's a real treat. It's the Billy Wilder courtroom drama adaptation of Agatha Christie's Witness for the Prosecution. That is a real gem of a courtroom drama slash murder mystery slash lots of just brilliance in it. And it's a movie that I will preface the way that the movie itself was prefaced by saying that if you know the ending, don't give it away. They actually advertised that when the film premiered, that if you know the ending, don't tell anyone about it. So that's coming in September. That's Witness for the Prosecution. So Rear Window, High Society, Witness for the Prosecution will all be in the theaters. Chris, do you want to just jump in with the Rear Window information? Because I think that's coming up sooner. Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually have Rear Window scheduled to play at the Ambler and Garden starting this weekend. So starting on Friday. And we'll hopefully see if we can bring it back as we get closer to that July date. And we will be scheduling a date at the county a little later into June or in the beginning of July. So keep an eye out for that. So definitely go catch Rear Window this weekend if you get the chance.
Absolutely. So right now, let's talk about the movie we have seen, His Girl Friday from 1940. I'm sure this is a movie that many of you have already seen or had at least heard of in the past. It's an uber classic screwball comedy in particular, one of the defining screwball comedies. And I'm going to go ahead and share some images. As usual, I'll talk about the movie up front for a couple minutes and then we'll open it up. Any thoughts, comments, questions you had, as Chris said, feel free to throw things in the chat, but then we'll open it up to talk about it after. So I'm going to go ahead and hopefully successfully do this. Let's see. Here we go. You should see Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. Do you? Yes? Okay, great. His Girl Friday. So His Girl Friday was a remake of a movie that had already been made once before. So I'll talk about the origins of the script and of the story. It began as a stage play in 1928 called The Front Page, which was a massive Broadway hit in 1928, written by these two guys here, Ben Hecht, who's on the top, and Charles MacArthur on the bottom. And Hecht and MacArthur wrote it as kind of a scathing satire of a business they knew firsthand, which was the newspaper business. They both started out as newspapermen in the 1920s. They were both very successful at the job. In Chicago is where they met when they were both newspapermen in Chicago. And they both decided to move to New York to write this play together. For both of them, it was their breakthrough hit as playwrights. Um, at the same time, in the late 1920s, they were both being courted by Hollywood, because in the late 1920s, as Hollywood was transitioning out of the silent era and into the era of talking pictures, it became very important to start recruiting writers who had an ear for dialogue, because all of a sudden the actors had to deliver dialogue on screen. So the dialogue that had been written before was just presented in intertitles, obviously in the silent movies, but then now we needed actors who could deliver the dialogue with stage trained, clear voices, which meant that a lot of actors lost their jobs. And then they also needed writers who had an ear for the way that people talk. And what made newspaper men and women, mostly men, but a few women, so attractive to Hollywood was that not only did they know the way that people talked and have that ear for writing that dialogue, they also knew stories and what felt relevant to audiences. So all of a sudden, with the advent of talking pictures came this onslaught of people who started in the newspaper business into Hollywood. And if you look at the credits of a lot of the top screenwriters, especially in the 1930s and into the 40s, you'll find that many of them started out as newspaper men and women, specifically Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur, who were two of the best screenwriters in the business. So they scored this huge hit in 1928 with The Front Page on Broadway. I should say that some of their later credits, they went on to work on a lot of screenplays together, including movies you've definitely heard of, like Gunga Din, Wuthering Heights, the 20th Century, another screwball comedy. Ben Hecht had a lot of uncredited work on movies like Gone with the Wind. They continued to have a really, really strong career in Hollywood, including as a partnership. The Front Page was first brought to the big screen in 1931, and that was importantly at a time when the sound recording technology had gotten smooth enough that their fast-paced dialogue could be recorded in the audio, because at the beginning of the transition from silence to talkies, the sound recording technology was kind of funky. And by 1931, it was possible to bring this movie to the big screen. This was the first adaptation in 1931, directed by Louis Milestone. It starred Adolphe Menjou, who's on the left there, and Pat O'Brien on the right. And if you don't know The Front Page and you don't know that the movie or the play, you will see that it's two men in the leads. Adolphe Menjou played Walter Burns, the editor, and Pat O'Brien played Hildy Johnson, the ace reporter. Same name, but a man in the original. And the premise was that he was a newspaper reporter in Chicago who wanted to move to New York City to switch gears and become an advertising man and settle down with his new wife. So this was what The Front Page was in 1931. Now, it was the genius of director Howard Hawks, who's there on the right, who had the inspiration, totally by accident, to switch the character of Hildy from a man to a woman. Howard Hawks was interested in remaking The Front Page by the end of the 1930s. He started to become interested in a remake and was a very established director. And he wanted to remake The Front Page because he believed, to quote him, that it had the finest modern dialogue that had ever been written. And he was trying to prove this to a group of people one day, and he sat them down and had the script and started to read it. And by many accounts, it was his secretary who he gave to read the lines of Hildy. It was a woman. And as he heard the woman deliver the lines written for the character Hildy Johnson, he thought, no, it's much better this way. It's so much more interesting. And that it kind of clicked for him. And he pitched that to Ben Hecht, one of the writers, and Hecht said, yeah, go with that. And he gave his blessing to make that switch. Hecht wasn't available to really work on the script with Hawks in depth. He kind of added a few things, but not really. It was his protege, another successful screenwriter named Charles Lederer. He's the one who's credited on the script, who worked closely with Howard Hawks to change the script to fit this new dynamic. And it was Charles Lederer who kind of came up with the idea that unlocked the whole thing, which was to have Hildy and Walter formerly be married. His idea. And so when that idea was thrown into the mix, that unlocked the entire script, and His Girl Friday was born and came together. So just a word about Howard Hawks, though. At this point in his career, he was really well established as a master of directing screwball comedies. These are just a few of his films, but if you look at the top two in the middle, he had already before this directed two of the defining screwball comedies of Hollywood history: 20th Century, starring Lionel Barrymore, or I'm sorry, John Barrymore and Carol Lombard in 1934, and Bringing Up Baby, which is one of the screwball comedies of all time, from 1938. The other movies, though, that we don't, I mean, Howard Hawks may or may not be a name that you recognize. He is responsible for some incredible movies, and more incredibly, I think, across a wide range of genres. I mean, talk about thinking, big in terms of all the genres that Hollywood could produce. Howard Hawks touched many of them and came up with some of the best movies in those genres. Here are just a few of his films. So he directed Scarface, the original Scarface, in 1932, which helped to define the gangster movie genre. He directed, as I said, those two screwball comedies. Right after His Girl Friday, directed one of the defining war movies, Sergeant York, in 1941. Made a couple of great, dramas and noirs with Bogey and Bacall, including The Big Sleep. A couple of westerns with John Wayne, including Red River, Rio Bravo. He produced, although many claim that he also directed, The Thing from Another World, one of the great, 50s sci-fi monster horror movies. And also a great musical, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, starring Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell. So this is just some of Howard Hawks's work, but you can see that he was really a director who worked across genres. And at this juncture in his career, he had already made a couple of great screwball comedies. It was also very in keeping with Howard Hawks's style to create a character who was a very tough, strong woman. There's a term that film historians have used for this, which is the Hawksian woman, which is a character type that emerges in many of his movies. The type is a woman who is tough talking, upfront, very sexy, very determined to be on par and equal to her male counterpart, not just in terms of their banter, but in terms of being equals in the world that they operate in together. Some examples here, you see on the right, there's Barbara Stanwyck in Ball of Fire, which is another great screwball comedy that Howard Hawks directed. And she's as feisty as can be and, really leads the story. And Lauren Bacall, who is often described as the Hawksian woman, she was Howard Hawks's discovery. I mean, really, if we're giving real credit, it's Howard Hawks's wife who discovered her, but Howard Hawks was the one who cast her in her first movie with Humphrey Bogart, and developed this type that Bacall continued to kind of epitomize for a while. So casting this movie, casting His Girl Friday, to cast the role of Walter Burns, that was a no-brainer for Howard Hawks. He went with an actor he worked with many times, Cary Grant, who had recently starred in two of Hawks's movies, Bringing Up Baby, which I mentioned earlier, in 1938, followed by Only Angels Have Wings, which is a drama from 1939. And they teamed up again a decade later to make two more movies, which were both screwball comedies, but later screwball comedies. I Was a Male War Bride in 1949, and Monkey Business with Ginger Rogers and Marilyn Monroe in 1952. And this was the roundabout reason why I chose His Girl Friday for this month, because those two later Howard Hawks Cary Grant movies just aired on TCM. You may have caught them as part of a Howard Hawks Cary Grant double feature that I wrote about. And they had a very, very fruitful partnership. They really loved working together. So casting Walter Burns, that was done from the beginning. Howard Hawks only ever pictured Cary Grant in that role. Casting Hildy Johnson, on the other hand, was a much more complicated task. And initially, Hawks wanted Carol Lombard there on the left, who had starred in another of his screwball comedies, as I said, the movie 20th Century. Carol Lombard would have had to be loaned out for the movie to Columbia, and she was just too expensive at this point. She was very, very, very much in demand, and they couldn't afford her. So she didn't get the part. And it was offered to all of these other actresses here. So going left to right, there's Katharine Hepburn, Irene Dunne, Jean Arthur, Margaret Sullivan, Claudette Colbert, Ginger Rogers, and unbelievably, all of them said no. And it's really, I think, one of the juiciest roles for a woman at this era of Hollywood history. And they all turned it down. And for different reasons, but nothing, they just weren't as interested in playing this part. When it came across Rosalind Russell's desk, she jumped at it. She saw that this was a great opportunity. In large part, it was a great opportunity to continue to forge a new image that she had started 1 year earlier, or just earlier the same year in 1939, with the movie The Women, which is a great film out of 1939, where starring Norma Shearer and Joan Crawford and Rosalind Russell, and it's one of the great comedies. And so much of that comedy comes from Rosalind Russell's performance. If you've seen The Women, it's Rosalind Russell, who Joan Crawford rightly predicted would run away with that picture. She did. She was a huge, huge hit in that film as a comedian. Not something she'd had an opportunity to prove before. And she wanted to continue to solidify that image. And His Girl Friday was the next opportunity. So with His Girl Friday, she really proved that she could handle comic delivery as well as anybody in Hollywood, and sometimes better. And she knew that she wasn't Howard Hawks' first choice. And she said as much to him on the set a couple days into production. She said, I wasn't the first choice, but you're stuck with me, so you might as well make the most of it. And he did, and he heard her, and they made one of her best movies. Side note, it was also a big boost for her in her personal life, because Cary Grant during this movie introduced her on set to a man who would become her one and only husband for the rest of her life. And so that was she always credited Cary Grant with one of the best things that ever happened to her. So this was a big movie for Rosalind Russell. His Girl Friday's biggest claim to fame, though, in hindsight and at the time, is its fast pace. That's what this movie is really, really known for. It's one of the fastest talking screwball comedies of all time, and kind of set that tone, that image that we still have in a lot of TV shows and movies today, of this fast-paced, fast-talking, tough as nails, totally cynical newsroom feel. This helped to create that style, that look, and the pacing of it was very much what Howard Hawks set out to accomplish with this movie. He wanted to make the fastest talking picture. And he encouraged all of his actors to ad-lib their lines, to come up with their own bits of business, to improvise on set, and especially to talk over each other. And he realized that naturally, when people argue with each other, or when people are trying to prove a point, they often talk over each other. They don't let each other finish their sentences. And so what he and Charles Lederer did, and if you go back and watch His Girl Friday again and pay attention to this, you'll see they wrote the script such that the beginnings and the ends of sentences didn't matter if you heard them or not. It's the middle of the sentences where the information is conveyed. So when the actors are talking over each other and cutting each other off, it doesn't matter. They were encouraged to do that. You weren't losing any information in the process by listening to that. And what made that extra challenging in 1940 was the fact that multi-track sound recording had not been invented yet. Have all these people easily being heard in the audio recording at the same time with one boom mic over top of them. So what he did was he set up microphones all over the set to catch the actors as clearly as possible. And he had a sound mixer on the set switching, turning the mics on and off on cue, which was made more complicated by the fact that they were often improvising. And so in some scenes, the sound mixer had to turn the microphones on and off as many as 35 times in just a single scene. And that was how he was able to get the audio recorded so that people could even hear what the actors were saying. So His Girl Friday was also a big breakthrough in terms of its sound recording, technical achievement, in addition to being a great, screwball comedy of the era. It was it was well received when it premiered. It was not one of the biggest hits of 1940, though. Here are some of the other movies that were much more acclaimed critical and box office successes, and definitely bigger Oscar contenders. His Girl Friday earned 0 Oscar nominations. Here were others that did earn more and earned higher praise and more at the box office. Rebecca, Hitchcock's debut in America, won the Oscar for Best Picture of 1940. And some other movies that premiered that year were another Cary Grant screwball comedy, The Philadelphia Story, The Grapes of Wrath, Pinocchio, Kitty Foyle, The Letter, Boomtown. These were all bigger hits of 1940. But the movie, His Girl Friday has come to be to have its kind of rightful place as one of the definitive screwball comedies, and definitely one of the best satires of the newspaper industry. And the last thing I'll say is that it's been, the story, the front page, has been brought to the big screen a couple of times, 2 more times after His Girl Friday. First was in 1931, as I said, His Girl Friday in 1940. Then Billy Wilder and his frequent co-writer I.A.L. Diamond took another stab at it in 1974 with the original 2 male characters, a faithful remake of the front page with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. And then in 1988, the location was changed to a TV newsroom with Burt Reynolds and Kathleen Turner and Christopher Reeve. The movie is switching channels. And that also had the switch from the man back to a female character. Of all of these, the only one that earned any Academy Award nominations was The Front Page. It was a Best Picture Oscar nominee in 1931. But in hindsight, the one that is typically regarded as the best of the bunch is His Girl Friday. So that's what I have to say about it up front, but I'm going to stop sharing, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts and questions are. So let's talk. Chris, are you there, Chris?
Yep, I'm
okay.
looking.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, Brian?
Yeah, hi. What I noticed this time was the editing of the movie. It has, in the beginning, there's a lot of long shots. It's almost filmed like a play.
Yeah.
And then as the action gets more frantic and screwball, there are cuts that are like a second. He cuts on the dialogue so quickly. And the pacing of the movie was great too, because there's enough. If the movie was frantic all the way through, it would be exhausting. There's a few scenes where it gets quiet, and it just, like the scene with them eating dinner, and especially the kind of poignant scene with the journalists talking about her leaving, and they all realize how cynical they are.
Yeah.
That's a nice moment of silence and calm before it all gets crazy again.
Yeah, you bring up a couple of really great points. To your first point about the editing, the original stage play, The Front Page, is set exclusively in the newsroom. And the 1931 version is very much faithful to that. It opens up the action to a couple of other locations, but Howard Hawks was determined to, that's the term that's used for when you take a stage play location and you add in a lot of other locations. It's called, you're opening up the action. So Howard Hawks was determined to open up the action even more with this version, to bring in a lot of other locales, and not just have us be in the reporter's room of the courtroom of the criminal courts building. And to your other point about the moments of calm, I've noticed that too. The lesson was learned when Howard Hawks directed Bringing Up Baby in 1938. That movie, while it's still, nowadays it's regarded as one of the best screwball comedies ever, and I think it's hilarious and wonderful. At the time, it was so much of a flop that Katharine Hepburn was labeled box office poison. And Bringing Up Baby is an assault to the senses in terms of the frantic pacing. And Howard Hawks learned that you have to have some straight characters and some moments of calm and seriousness in order to kind of balance that out and not have it be too much for everybody. So that was directly learned 2 years earlier on Bringing Up Baby.
Thank you. Anne?
I'm curious about the title of the movie because I remember A Girl Friday was seen more as like an assistant or almost like an admin. That used to be a term, like even in the want ads when I was a kid. Somebody was looking for a Girl Friday. Is it in that context or another?
Yeah, no, it is that context. It's, the colloquial reappropriation of the Robinson Crusoe Friday, his faithful servant, but being the girl who he can rely on. I think I've always seen it as being a little bit ironic. It's both Walter Burns being, thinking of Hildy as his faithful one who's never going to leave his side, but she's not content to be a servant by any stretch of the imagination. And she's, determined to really be treated as an equal or leave if not. So yeah, I think that there's a little touch of irony in that too. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you guys think. I think there's a lot to say about their dynamic too in the movie. So anything that jumped out, whether you're seeing it for the first time or many times.
Tom, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple things. First of all, would you talk a little bit about the supporting role players? I mean, the character actors in this film are just it's an amazing group, from the reporters to the mayor and the police chief Pinky and the Earl, and it's just that while obviously Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell just are amazing in it. The character actors, the more I watch, the character actors really help make it what it is. So if you could talk a little bit about the character actors, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
The other thing is just was it odd for a film that there were two kind of what we would call today meta moments in the film, where they talk about one guy, oh, he looks like Ralph Bellamy, and then Cary Grant refers to Archie Leach. Was that fairly? I don't remember that much in many films at all, let alone of that era. So
yeah, that's a great. I'll start with that. The two references that he's referring to are inside jokes that audiences at the time would probably have caught on to. Certainly the reference to Ralph Bellamy. I'll explain what they are, and then I'll, in case you didn't catch them. When Cary Grant's character is trying to get the seductive blonde lady to entrap the unwitting fiance to get him thrown in jail, she says, "What does he look like?" And it's a throwaway line, but Cary Grant says, "He looks like that fellow in the movies, Ralph Bellamy." That's the man who was playing him. Ralph Bellamy was the actor who was playing him. So it was, it's as if an actor on screen today was like, "Oh, who does he look like? Oh, he looks like Matt Damon," and it's Matt Damon who played. Like, everyone in the theaters would have caught that was, actually who he is. And the other one is at the very end, he says something like, "Listen, you're through." And Cary Grant's response to hearing someone say, like, you're done with, is, "The last person who said that to me was Archie Leach," right before and then he like trails off. Archie Leach is Cary Grant. That's his original name. So in both cases, that was Cary Grant improvising, as Howard Hawks encouraged him to, as him ad-libbing on the spot. And that was very much Cary Grant's style of humor, was to make that was his own style coming out. And so in both cases, those were his own inventions. And it was Howard Hawks who said, "Go for it." Harry Cohn, who was the head of Columbia, tried to get those moments removed, because he thought, as you're pointing out, rightly so, that this was not common practice, and that it might be a little bit too meta and too, taking the audience out of this. And Howard Hawks fought for it. In both cases, they stayed in. And yeah, in terms of the supporting cast, well, Ralph Bellamy leads the supporting cast as Bruce Baldwin. Ralph Bellamy, poor Ralph Bellamy. He was just, he kind of at this point in his career made a career out of playing the guy who doesn't get the girl. His only Oscar nomination was for playing that exact type in the 1937 screwball comedy, The Awful Truth, where again, he loses the girl to Cary Grant. So this was kind of his shtick at this point. Although you will find if you dig a little bit more into his filmography, there are plenty of performances peppered in there where he's playing a much different kind of character who in some cases is the one who is the has it together, and he's not a goofball. And had a very much longer career though. He kind of took a break from movie acting in the 1940s and 50s and returned. He went on in I think this was the mid 1950s to play or early 60s to play FDR in the stage play Sunrise at Campobello. And he came back to the movies to play that part again, to reprise that role. He earned a Tony Award for playing FDR, and it's a very, very different performance of a later Ralph Bellamy, and went on to be a great character actor in his older age. I think one of his last movies was Pretty Woman. He was, he ended up making all these appearances later on in his career. And yeah, all of the guys in the newsroom and Earl Williams, all of the supporting actors are just totally deliver in this. In some scenes, it's a real ensemble piece. I agree with you. John Quaylen is the one who plays Earl Williams, and he popped up in everything. All of those actors were in a lot of movies of this era, so I wouldn't be surprised if you recognize some of their faces from other films. Gene Lockhart was the sheriff. A lot. They often came up in different ones. In fact, who was it? Porter Hall, who was one of the newsmen we saw in The Thin Man earlier. If you were with us earlier, he was the one who did it. He was the lawyer who killed, who was responsible for all the murders. So a lot of these guys came up in a lot of the movies of this era. Yeah.
Christine, I think I saw you come off mute. Did you have a question? No. Okay, Grant.
Hi, Hannah. I was wondering if you could go more into like the adaptation bit of it with coming from like the Front Page, which was like very successful and has gone through many like revivals over the years, just like into the film adaptation.
Yeah, was there something in particular that you want to know more about?
I mean, like I know it was like a film before His Girl Friday, so I was wondering why the switch. Like, was it just to get more female characters in there, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what attracted Howard Hawks to it is what attracted Howard Hawks to a lot of the movies that he made, which was this kind of both a professional and a power and a kind of sex struggle between a man and a woman. And this like chase element of who's trying to get who, and they're on equal footing. And if you look at a lot of Howard Hawks's movies, he's always interested in these women trying to get something that they want, and the man's getting in the way. And sometimes the man is kind of emasculated by it, and the woman. And so this dynamic, I think, as I said, as he heard the script being delivered from a woman, this kind of trope that he really responded to a lot jumped out at him and became his interest in the story and taking it in that direction. It's a very, I mean, how many people have seen the original 1931, The Front Page? It's a lesser known, it is available to see, but it's a very different dynamic. And at one point at the end, Pat O'Brien even makes this very small allusion. He's the one who plays Hildy Johnson. He makes this little allusion to the fact that he feels almost like, oh, well, that's, you're courting me almost like it's a romantic thing. It's like there's this little throwaway moment where there's like this hint of he's uncomfortable because their relationship borders on something maybe more than just a boss and employee. There's like a little bit too much trying to get. So by moving this to what would have been, Hollywood would have shown in 1940 to be a heterosexual relationship, that was made more interesting.
Thank you so much.
John?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're interested in seeing the original front page, Criterion has the Blu-ray of His Girl Friday, which also has a redone version, a new print of the front page.
Yeah.
And I had seen the front page a long time ago, and have seen His Girl Friday is, a top 10 movie of all time for me, and I've seen it a lot of times. And it's almost unwatchable once you have
I know, yeah.
indelibly impressed upon yourself the dynamic of Roz Russell and Cary Grant. It just seems too weird that it's going in a different direction.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I wanted to pick up what you were saying about the supporting characters. I really think Ralph Bellamy is amazing. In a lot of movies like this, as has been said, the supporting characters are so important, and their ability to play off of him as a straight man his reactions are just so wonderfully, kind and gentle, but dim-witted at the same time that it's really a pleasure to watch him.
Yeah, and Cary Grant, watching him, if you liked Cary Grant playing off of him and you've never seen The Awful Truth from 1937, definitely catch that one too. That's another great screwball comedy from a few
I
years
think one of the all-time great screwball scenes is when he comes out to meet Bruce Baldwin and
Yes.
does the whole exchange with the older man and then back, and it's just great writing and great comic timing.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the supporting, the point came up before about the supporting actors, and the 1931 version tying in. In 1931, when the front page was first adapted, it was produced during what's called the pre-code era, which we may have talked about at some point, which was before the censorship guidelines were really in place in Hollywood or really being enforced. So a lot of stuff was allowed to be on screen that was not when this movie was made in 1940. So one of the things was the end line of the front page. The way that the front page ends is that Walter Burns says, okay, you have my blessing, you can leave, go get married. And he's like, all right. He hems and haws and he's like, okay, I'm gonna quit the business. And he leaves with his bride-to-be. The Hildy character leaves. And as a parting gift of goodwill, Walter Burns gives Hildy his watch. He says, this is my wedding present to you, and leaves. And he goes and he's going to take the train to New York. And Walter calls his guy and says, have the train stopped, have him arrested. The son of a bitch stole my watch. So he sets him up to be brought right back in, to have him arrested and not let him get away. And of course, the son of a bitch stole my watch wouldn't have played after the pre-code era. So that whole ending had to be changed. So they went through a couple of rewrites to see if they could do something similar, and that was thrown away. And that ending moment of, maybe Bruce can put us up in Albany, that was what they came up with as the which I think works beautifully, but that was that. And the other thing that was not going to fly in this 1940 iteration was that the character of Molly Malloy was a prostitute. Earl Williams is the one woman who was nice to Earl Williams. She was explicitly a prostitute in the original play. And that was not even really hinted at in His Girl Friday. I mean, she could have been anyone. It was like she just stumbled upon him on her way home. In the 1974 version, if you've seen that one, it's Carol Burnett who plays that character. And it's returned to, to the idea that she's a prostitute. It's, more hinted at. And Carol Burnett thought that was one of her worst performances. And it's worth, because we have a moment, I'll share with you this funny story that I heard from an interview with her, that she was on she didn't go to the premiere of the front page in 1974 because she was so embarrassed by her performance as Molly Malloy. And she wouldn't go to the premiere. She didn't want to see herself on screen. Years later, she's on an airplane where they're playing the movie. They announced that they're going to show the movie. And you know, they say we're thrilled to have with us on board one of the stars of the picture, Carol Burnett, and she's on the plane, and she's, you know, and everyone applauds as this movie starts. And she said that by the end of the movie, there was no applause. Everyone was as horrified as she was. And she asked if she could take the microphone and speak to everybody. And she said, I want to apologize to everyone for my performance in that film. And then of course, everyone laughed because she's, you know, Carol Burnett and she's hilarious, but she thought she was terrible in that. But you can check out that movie too and see what you think of that version. That's Carol Burnett's own review. I see that some things came through in the chat. I don't know if other people had questions or comments they want to share.
Yes, Risa?
Can't hear you.
Am I unmuted now?
Mhm.
So one thing that was confusing to me is in the very beginning, when Hildy comes in to tell the Cary Grant character that she is leaving to get married, she's not going to do this anymore. But he said, oh, we haven't seen each other for a while. Was she working there, or why did she come to basically cut off her career and ties? It didn't make sense to me that she would come in, and it took a while with a lot of dialogue and a lot of back and forth before she finally got out what she was going to be doing, you know, leaving to have to be a married woman. But I wondered whether she had been working somewhere else or working there. It didn't make any sense why she was coming, except sort of to tease him a little bit, or to, you know, because it had only been apparently 4 months, I guess, since they had been divorced.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's a great point. What do you all think about why she came back at the beginning? I mean, you're right. It's not totally clear, but yeah.
Actually, could I jump in then?
Yeah.
Okay, 2 things I want to address. One in the beginning, you addressed part of what I wanted to ask about a woman's power role. I saw a powerful woman there. Was that the beginning of that type of thing, or did that spark something to continue? You spoke with that partially. And then on lighter side, the other thing I wanted to ask, did anybody see the reporter that was Bob Hope's twin brother? I mean, the guy looked like him, his mannerisms. Do you know who I'm speaking of? There was a reporter that you didn't see it. It just reeked of Bob Hope.
Yeah. I think I know who you're talking about. Was it
Mannerisms, his everything about him is.
Yeah.
I don't know who that actor was.
There are 2 who I'm thinking of, but yeah. I mean, first let's address that question of why do you think Hildy came back at the beginning?
Right.
To kick off the whole plot, the whole action. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
If anyone has any thoughts, you don't have to raise your hand. Just feel free to jump in.
Well, I
Anyone?
think she came back because she kind of maybe subconsciously had feelings for Cary Grant still. They'd been divorced for less than a year. There's no reason she can't send him a telegram and be like, I'm out of here, goodbye. It was almost like maybe subconsciously she's giving him another chance. Like, I have this other man who's willing to marry me. What is your offer?
Yeah. Right, yeah. I mean, for me, I think that she says, stop calling me, stop sending me messages 1,000 times a day. Enough is enough. Let's, I'm getting married. I do think though that moment, there's a moment at the end where she sort of breaks down and starts crying. And I think that that's because this character is like genuinely conflicted about the fact that she loves her job and she loves the environment that she's in. And so I think that her return, she doesn't return hesitantly at the beginning. She's like, hey, everybody, Hildy's back, and she walks in. And I always read it as, it's her returning to her element. But also I agree with you, Brian, that there's an element of like, what can he give me? Let's see, before I go on this route. But there was something else that was meant, about the powerful women of this era. Yeah. This is something that was very much an element of screwball comedy, which is and screwball comedy, I should say, really came into fruition as a genre with the advent of talking pictures in the 1930s, definitely mid to late 1930s and into the early 40s was like the heyday of the genre. and one of the it's specifically a subgenre of romantic comedy, and the idea is that it's spoofing all of the traditional, courtship elements. It's not, in the traditional sense of a romance. It upends all of those tropes. So one of the things that very much is part of screwball comedy is the woman's going after the man, or the woman is, of a strong equal position, as I was saying. And this is in all of the screwball comedies. Even though the man will do his very best to manipulate her, she's very much a woman of power. So that's part of what was going on there. The focus on a woman in the workplace, a woman who wants to be a professional and wants to have a career. This was also something Hollywood was taking up a lot in the early 1940s. Concurrent sort of with the war, and women taking on roles in other elements of society. But if you think about other movies of the era, like Woman of the Year is another one that comes to mind with Katharine Hepburn. And it's the first Hepburn and Tracy movie, where she is just a very strong, also reporter. Think about the jobs that were available, but like she's a real powerhouse woman who's trying to have a career and have a relationship with a man, and possibly settle down and have children, whatever. And there's the darker turn with Mildred Pierce that comes up later in the mid 1940s, where she's also a strong working woman trying to juggle motherhood and her career. This came up a lot in this era. So it's a screwball comedy thing. It's also what Hollywood was doing at the time thing.
Two items that came up in the chat. First, to answer the question about the Bob Hope lookalike, I want to thank Wynn and Ann for tracking down Frank Jenks, who is that actor. There's a call out there that he was great in Christmas in Connecticut. You want to check that out?
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah.
And then also, so I guess this is a question to open up to everyone. That a comment was shared. We actually had problems with the movie. Well, it was definitely screwball. It was difficult to deal with the unscrupulous way the press acted. We know it was the premise of the movie, but maybe it's just the sensitivities of today that put it in a different light. So knowing that it's written by newspapermen, just how, does anyone want to comment on that and the unscrupulous nature of the press as portrayed?
Go ahead, just jump in when you have a thought.
Grant?
I feel like in some ways it acts as like a satire. It kind of makes fun of itself and the people running the newspaper. So I do get that, though. I do get that concern.
Yeah, and I love how jaundiced and jaded and cynical it is. I mean, it's completely satire. I think it's easy to feel that way about journalism today as well. And I think we accept that so fully in this movie. When you step back and think about the Cary Grant character, he is a complete narcissistic sociopath, completely unscrupulous. When Molly Malloy jumps out the window, he's making his entrance into the room at that point. Everyone's going to look. He couldn't care less. That someone has just, probably committed suicide, and he has, no interest whatsoever in any sympathy towards it. He has, Ralph Bellamy arrested 3 different times. The scene with the mother, the mother-in-law when she's taken away, they're completely cynical and sarcastic. And to me, that's what makes it so much fun, to see that. I think one of the things of comedy is allowing us to play out a sense of anarchy and, a sociopathic behavior in a safe way, in a way that's funny.
Yeah, and I would argue also that it's not just the newsroom that is targeted here. It's the government is as corrupt. So, as you're almost rooting for Cary Grant because he's going to unseat this corrupt mayor and sheriff. So like in the end, they did a good thing by, saving this man's life. But every single time anything that happens, every man in that room is calling their paper with a different take on the story. They're like, oh, she struggled with or he struggled with the police, and oh, he went quietly. And if you hear these rapid fire lines, nobody's doing their job well. And that was Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur were deliberately, skewering people they knew, and it did not go over well with some people that they worked with. When the play premiered in 1928, Walter Burns was modeled on real life people, and Hildy Johnson, all of these characters were directly supposed to be poking fun, but also like, this is what it is, guys. This is how bad it is. Like, this is as cynical as they really are in the newsroom. And that picture was really, it really opened the floodgates for a different take on newsroom portrayals in the theater and in movies, with the Front Page, continuing obviously with His Girl Friday, but definitely when the Front Page premiered in 1928, that kind of pulled the curtain back and allowed for a lot more different looks at what the job of a newspaper man was.
This is Julie. One of the things that I initially thought of as I started watching the movie and seeing like the ruthlessness of the newspaper business and of the newspaper men and women was like, it reminded me of, I remember learning in history class about how Hearst and yellow journalism was one of the things that actually propelled us to get into the war in Cuba, like Teddy Roosevelt and the charge of San Juan Hill. It was part of the, like, it was the newspapers that were integral into getting us into that war. So, like the ruthlessness power of the press based on what they want to achieve their goals, or what their slant, what their story is, what their perspective will be to achieve a certain result. So I was thinking of that, and I'm watching, all the newspaper men. Like there was the one who particularly kept calling his editor about the Red Scare, and the communists are invading us, and so yeah.
Yeah, that's leftover. It was pulled in from the original play where there was, Earl Williams was supposed to be like painted as a red instigator, a communist, but you're right. Yeah, absolutely. The role of the press, especially when there weren't widely other forms of, news communication as we have now, that the press was one of the main, disseminators of information. And so absolutely, the role of the press was, just led to all kinds of consequences. If this is something that interests you, I don't know how many of you listen to the podcast called You Must Remember This. It's a phenomenal podcast, hosted and written by Karina Longworth, who's a really, really phenomenal contemporary film historian. The podcast is called You Must Remember This, and the current season is about, which comes out, the episodes come out every week, and you can find it online. You can find it, in the podcast app. The current season is about the gossip columnists, Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper. And Luella Parsons worked for William Randolph Hearst for her whole career, and the power of Hearst and his contemporaries as news media moguls is the focus of this season. And each episode is maybe 45 minutes, maybe give or take. And it's really, really eye-opening about how much their influence controlled not just historical moments, but Hollywood and the careers of so many people involved. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. I'm seeing some excellent examples of other cynical newspaper movies in the chat, so I agree. There are some great other recommendations there.
There was another question that came up about the adaptation from Front Page. It says, to me, the romance in their relationship was very thin. They seemed more like competitive colleagues, and Hildy's short crying scene at the end seemed jarring, almost seemed grafted on. Can you talk more about how they adapted the script and chose what kind of romantic relationship to create?
Yeah, it was so much a group effort. As I said, it was Howard Hawks and Charles Lederer who wrote the script, but then a lot was ad-libbed. And the dynamic between Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell was real. They adored working with each other and had a really great rapport. And a lot of their chemistry, I think, kind of came out of that and the way that they played off each other. Yeah, I mean, it's not like any kind of they kiss one time for like a second, you know, it's not like a conventional, you know, passionate romantic. I think their passion is in the work that they do together. And that's kind of where it goes. The end, it's funny that you say it almost feels grafted on. If you watch the movie again, you'll notice there's no music at all in the entire film until that last minute when they're kind of coming to a resolution. The music is all the dialogue, the patter of the people talking. There's no soundtrack, there's no score. There's a moment of music at the very end of the movie that comes on. So the feeling that it's like maybe grafted on or something feels a little bit kind of inauthentic at the very end, may come from that too.
John?
You were talking about the patter, Hannah, and the improvisation. I think I read at one point that Roz Russell had actually hired a writer to write lines for her, which she then inserted in the improvisation. And a lot of her quips and funny comments came from that, where she, you know, so that kind of underlines what you were saying about there are a lot of different voices that made this happen.
Absolutely, that's true. Yeah, she wrote about that in her own memoir, that she brought someone else in. The only person who was on to her was Cary Grant. He would say, "What have you got today?" like secretly, and they'd work out little bits together. But she didn't tell Howard Hawks. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone else? Risa again?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of, one part of it that I thought was kind of interesting was the cage that the criminal was in as a prison cell. And I wonder why they used it kind of like that. It sort of made it a little kinder and gentler, I guess, to sort of encourage you to see him in not such a heinous light. But you usually don't see that kind of a prison cell in a movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Similar kind of look and feel to the Front Page, the way it was in the original. Some of that with the gallows right outside the window and the cell right there. Yeah, it's kind of a crossover, but yeah, it's an interesting design choice. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. I do want to mention before, Chris, I don't know if we're wrapping up, but I remembered something that I had meant to say about our next movie, about Rear Window. I just don't want to forget to tell you that there's going to be a weekend-long Hitchcock marathon on TCM at the end of this month. It's the last weekend of June. So if you're interested in catching Rear Window on TV, I hope you'll see it in the movie theaters. But if you're also interested in catching that and other Hitchcock movies, that's at the very last weekend of June. All weekend is just Hitchcock movies on Turner Classic Movies. So I just remembered that I didn't want to forget to say that. I didn't mean to derail us, but go ahead. Yeah.
I had one other thought, Hannah, which was, it struck me this time that I watched it, was they're obviously, the reporters and everyone are on their telephones all the time. And it really struck me how it almost seemed like cell phones, you know, that rapid connection that they have back to the newsroom, and, you know, that Cary Grant is constantly barking orders on the phone. The phone is, and it's such an instrument of driving forward what's happening in the action that it seemed like they were on their cell phones almost this time.
That's such a great point. I hadn't thought about that, but I agree with you. Yeah.
I have one more comment about the phones. They were all ringing. How did they know which one was the right one to answer? You know?
That's where they live and work all the time, I guess. They figure it out.
The phones really work that quickly? You could just click, click, click and connect that way? Was that poetic license? Really
They
happened?
had the operator there ready to connect them all the time.
On call.
They were all in the criminal courts building. So that, you know, that's where they were. That's where the newsroom is. Yeah.
There was one question here, just looking to the future, asking if Hannah would consider appearing at one of the theaters. And I don't want to speak for you, Hannah, but we are definitely looking to bring discussions back in person as we move forward with our reopening. And yeah, we'll see which theaters that works.
I absolutely hope to. I'm fully vaccinated and ready to be in a movie theater again. So yeah. Great.
Any other comments from anyone? Once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for this discussion. We look forward to seeing you at future films. Hannah, I'll turn things over to you for the last word.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. I hope you enjoyed His Girl Friday and may even check out some of the other adaptations. The movie is going to also be on TCM again, I think later this week. So if you wanted to do a rewatch, knowing all that you know now, you can keep an eye out for that. And that whatever it is, weekend long, I think it starts like Friday night into Monday morning, Hitchcock movie marathon is definitely worth checking out the last weekend of June. Whatever those dates are, the 26th, something like that. And I wrote the intros for a lot of those titles too. So thank you again for coming out. I look forward to talking about Rear Window, and I hope that we can all see it in the movie theaters within the next month. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Hannah. You're the Roz Russell of our group.
Thank you.
That is the nicest compliment I've ever gotten. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.